Chapter 1. The Gilded Cage. The crystal chandeliers of the Skyview penthouse ballroom scattered light like frozen diamonds, each glint a tiny reflection of Alara's own imprisoned spirit. Her smile was a masterclass in deception, a flawless practiced curve of her lips that felt like a brand upon her face. It never reached her eyes, which held the quiet, desperate sheen of polished sea glass. Around her, the elite of Silvercrest City swam in a sea of couture and caviar, their laughter a hollow symphony that echoed off the marble floors. The air was thick with the cloying scent of expensive perfume and ambition. This was her world, a gilded cage of polished manners and predetermined paths. And at her side, the gilded lock himself, Julian. His hand rested on the small of her back, a possessive weight that felt less like an affection and more like an anchor chain. He was everything her family had ever wanted for her, handsome in a sharp corporate way, his wealth old and respectable, his manners impeccably cold. He was reciting a story about a merger, his words smooth and rehearsed, and Alara nodded along, the script of her responses coming to her lips automatically. "You're quiet tonight, my dear," Julian murmured, his voice a low hum against her ear. His fingers pressed just a fraction harder, a silent command to perform better. His touch was like ice, seeping through the silk of her emerald gown, chilling her skin. "Just a headache," Alara lied, her voice a soft, melodic thing she hardly recognized as her own. Her gaze, desperate for an escape, drifted past his shoulder, past the glittering throng, to the wall of floor-to-ceiling windows. Beyond the glass, beneath a velvet sky studded with stars, lay the Blackwood, a dark, rolling sea of ancient trees that bordered the city's manicured edge, a place of whispered warnings and childhood forbiddance. But now it called to her. A strange primal pull emanated from its depths, a silent, resonant song that made her heart thrum a wild, frantic rhythm against the cage of her ribs. She could almost hear it, the whisper of the wind through pine needles, the distant call of something free. Suddenly, the air in the room changed. It was a palpable shift, a drop in pressure that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The mindless chatter died mid-sentence, fading into a stunned whisper that swept through the crowd like a wave. The string quartet faltered for a single telling note. A man had entered. He didn't stride. He dominated. He was tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to strain the seams of his exquisitely tailored black suit. His hair was the color of winter ash, swept back from a brow that spoke of fierce intelligence and fiercer command. But it was his eyes that arrested her. They were a shocking, glacial blue, and they scanned the room not with social curiosity, but with the cold, assessing focus of a predator separating prey from threat. And then they found hers. The connection was a physical blow. A jolt, raw and electric, seared through Alara, rooting her to the spot. Her champagne flute trembled in her hand, the bubbles suddenly frantic. The cacophony of the gala faded into a distant hum, the hundreds of people blurring into insignificance. The world narrowed, sharpened, until it contained only the two of them, locked in a gaze that felt centuries old. His eyes were not polite. They were not curious. They held a look of stark, terrifying recognition. It was as if he had been searching for her for a lifetime and had finally found her, perched on the arm of another man. The intensity in that blue gaze was a claim, a possession, a promise of something so wild and profound it stole the very air from her lungs. Julian stiffened beside her, his body turning rigid. Caleb Thorne! He spat the name like a curse, his voice laced with a mixture of fear and contempt. The damned recluse! He owns most of the Blackwood, never shows his face in civilized company. What in God's name is he doing here? Ignoring the parted crowd, Caleb began to move. He was a force of nature cutting a path through a field of wheat. The city's most powerful CEOs and socialites instinctively stepped back, creating a wake for him. He acknowledged no one, his path unwavering, his devastating eyes never once leaving Ilara's. The room was utterly, profoundly silent, holding its breath. He stopped mere inches from her. The space between them crackled with a wild, untamed energy that made the fine hairs on her nape rise. He smelled of cold night air, of pine forests, and of something deeply, inherently wild. He didn't extend a hand. He didn't offer a greeting. He simply looked down at her, his gaze burning with an intensity that felt like a touch. When he spoke, his voice was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated not in her ears, but in her very bones, in the deepest, most hidden parts of her soul. It was the voice of the forest itself. "You're in the wrong cage, little songbird." The words were not a question. They were a statement of absolute fact. Before the gasp could fully leave her lips, before a spluttering, outraged Julian could form a coherent word, Caleb Thorne turned. Without a backward glance, he walked away, retreating into the crowd that swallowed him whole as quickly as it had parted. The spell broke. Sound rushed back into the room in a confused, excited babble. But Ilara heard none of it. She stood frozen, her body trembling with a seismic shock that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a terrifying, exhilarating awakening. The perfectly ordered world she had known, the future, the engagement, the gilded cage, lay shattered at her feet, and through the cracks she could see only the dark, wild, beckoning trees of the Blackwood. Chapter 2. The lure of the wild. The days after the gala bled into one another, a monochrome smear of obligation and echoing silence. Ilara moved through her life at the family estate like a ghost, haunting its own future. Julian's touch, once merely cold, now felt like the deliberate closing of a cage door. His fingers on her arm a constant grim reminder of the life sentence she was expected to serve. But her mind, her soul, was no longer hers to command. It belonged to the memory of a pair of glacial blue eyes and a voice that had resonated in her very marrow. "You're in the wrong cage, little songbird." The words were a mantra, a torment, a key itching at a lock she hadn't known existed. The Blackwood, visible from every window of the estate's east wing, was no longer just a forbidden forest. It was a siren's call. Its shadows whispered promises of answers, its depths pulsed with the same wild energy she had felt radiating from Caleb Thorne. The pull was an ache in her bones, a physical yearning she could no longer ignore. One afternoon, as a heavy silence settled over the manicured gardens, the call became unbearable. Without a plan, without a thought for consequence, Ilara simply walked. She crossed the immaculate lawn, her steps quickening as she reached the untamed border where grass gave way to wild ferns and the first ancient gnarled oaks of the Blackwood. Stepping into the forest was like stepping into another world. The air, thick and cool, was a potent cocktail of damp earth, decaying leaves, and sweet pine. The light transformed, the sun fracturing into 1,000 shimmering coins that dappled the lush undergrowth. The sounds of the city vanished, replaced by the symphony of the wild, the rustle of unseen creatures, the sigh of the wind through the high canopy, the distant chuckle of water, over stone. With every step deeper into the embrace of the trees, the tight, anxious knot in her chest began to loosen. The weight of expectations, the chill of Julian's presence, it all sloughed off her like an old skin. A profound, inexplicable sense of homecoming washed over her, both thrilling and terrifying in its intensity. She was so lost in the sensation that the sharp snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot. Elara froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. From behind the massive trunk of a 1,000-year-old oak, a shadow detached itself. It was a wolf, but no wolf from any book or documentary. It was majestic, terrifying, and breathtakingly beautiful. It stood nearly as high as her waist, its powerful muscles coiled beneath a coat of stunning silver and frost-white fur that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. And its eyes, they were a piercing, intelligent blue she would know anywhere. The same eyes that had seen straight through her at the gala. This was Kaelin. The knowledge didn't come as a shock. It settled into her soul as a fundamental, unshakable truth. Logic screamed at her to run, to fear, but a deeper primal instinct held her rooted. There was no malice in its gaze, only a fierce, ancient knowing. The wolf, Kaelin, tilted its massive head, studying her. Then, with a grace that belied its size, it turned and padded softly deeper into the woods. After a few paces, it paused, looking back over its powerful shoulder. It let out a soft, chuffing sound, a clear, impatient flick of its ear. The message was undeniable, echoing in her mind as if he'd spoken it aloud. Follow me. Her heart wasn't pounding with fear. It was drumming a wild, frantic rhythm of thrilling anticipation. Without a second thought, she obeyed. He led her on a winding path, through thickets and across clearings, until the sound of rushing water grew loud. They emerged into a hidden grove so beautiful it stole her breath. A waterfall, a sheer ribbon of silver, cascaded down mossy rocks into a crystal-clear pool that reflected the emerald canopy above. The air was misty and cool, filled with the negative ions of crashing water. This was a place of raw, untouched magic. The white wolf stepped into a broad shaft of sunlight that cut through the trees. For a moment it stood there, magnificent and still. Then the air around it seemed to shimmer, to warp. There was no violent transformation, no sound of breaking bones. It was a blur of light and shadow, a seamless, awe-inspiring rearrangement of form. One moment the wolf stood there. The next, Kaelin Thorne stood in its place. He was utterly naked, bathed in the sunlight, and completely unself-conscious. Elara's breath caught, a hot flush spreading across her chest and up her neck. But she couldn't look away. His body was a brutal testament to raw power and primal beauty. Every muscle was defined, carved from stone and sinew, from the broad planes of his chest to the taut strength of his abdomen and powerful thighs. He was perfection, wrought in flesh and strength, a god of the wild made manifest. Water droplets from the mist gleamed on his skin. He ran a hand through his ash-gray hair, and his blue eyes, still holding that unnerving lupine intensity, locked on hers. "You came," he said. His voice was different here, deeper, richer, stripped of the city's pretense. It was the voice of the forest, the waterfall, the wind. It vibrated through her, a tangible caress. Paralyzed by awe and a desire so acute it was painful, Elara could only manage a whisper. "What are you?" A ghost of a smile, fierce and possessive, touched his lips. He took a step closer, and the heat radiating from his body was a brand against her cool skin. Yours, he stated, as if it were the simplest, most absolute truth in the world. And you are mine. I've heard your song echoing in this forest for months, a lonely melody that called to the wild part of my soul. It has been a torment and a prayer. That man in the city, he is deaf to your music. He seeks to cage the very thing that makes you beautiful. He took another step, closing the distance between them. She had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. I can hear every note, Ilara. I feel your rhythm in my own blood. He lifted his hand, and with a reverence that belied his fierce appearance, he brushed the backs of his fingers against her cheek. The contact was an electric shock, a jolt of pure, undiluted connection that made her knees weak. "The question is," he murmured, his voice dropping to a husky whisper that was almost a growl, his face so close she could feel his breath, warm and sweet, against her lips. "Will you finally listen?" Chapter 3. The claim, Kalen's cabin, was a revelation. Nestled in a clearing like a secret the forest had decided to keep, it was built of massive, hand-hewn logs and had a roof thick with vibrant moss. It wasn't the crude shack she'd half expected, but a sanctuary. Inside, it was a study of contrasts, rugged and warm, wild and deeply civilized. The main room was dominated by a great stone fireplace where a fire now crackled, its light dancing over walls lined with shelves overflowing with books, philosophy, history, poetry, nestled alongside field guides to flora and fauna. The air was an intoxicating blend of wood smoke, aged paper, and the crisp, clean scent that was uniquely him. He had given her a soft, worn flannel shirt to change into. Swimming in the fabric, enveloped by his scent, pine, snow, and something deeply masculine, she felt a safety she'd never known. Now they sat on a thick bearskin rug before the fire, the heat seeping into her bones. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was thick, charged, humming with the weight of everything that had been said and everything that was yet to come. "It's called a mate bond," Kalen began, his voice a low rumble that harmonized with the fire's crackle. His eyes, fixed on the flames, held ancient galaxies within their blue depths. "It's not a choice. It's a recognition, a connection that goes deeper than blood, older than memory. My soul recognized its other half in yours the moment you entered that gala." He finally turned to look at her, the firelight gilding the sharp planes of his face. "My kind, we are shifters, the guardians and the essence of these woods. And we are born knowing we have one fated match. One. I've waited centuries for you, Ilara. I've watched empires rise and fall, waiting centuries." The word was a breathless exhale. Her mind tried to grasp the enormity of it, the sheer weight of his loneliness. He wasn't just a man. He was a myth, a force of nature, and he had been waiting for her. A profound shadow, deep and aching, passed over his features. The fierce alpha vanished, leaving behind a being etched with an old, enduring grief. "You are my second chance, my reason for enduring the endless turn of seasons." His jaw tightened. "My first chance ended in tragedy. A human like you. Her name was Lyra. I was younger, more beast than man, ruled by the fire of the bond. I tried to claim her, but the bond, the change, it was too much for a mortal body to withstand. It was not a death, it was a unraveling. A pain I have carried like a shard of ice in my heart every day since the confession hung between them, stark and terrible. It was a testament to his dangerous primal nature and the profound centuries-deep loneliness that was its counterweight. Every instinct screamed at her to flee from this beautiful, deadly creature. But she didn't. She saw the raw vulnerability in the depths of his blue eyes, the desperate hope warring with a grief so old it was part of his DNA. He had shown her his greatest shame, his deepest fear, and in doing so had given her a power over him that was more binding than any force. She moved first. Rising onto her knees, she closed the small space between them. Her hand, trembling slightly, came up to cradle the fierce, beautiful plane of his cheek. His skin was warm, and at her touch his eyes slid shut. A sound tore from his chest, a low, visceral growl of pure, unvarnished need. It was not a sound of threat, but of utter surrender. When his eyes opened again, they glowed with a faint, ethereal blue light, the wolf looking out at her with a love so fierce it was terrifying. "I have fought the storm inside me since the moment I saw you," he confessed, his voice graveled with the effort of his restraint. His own hand came up, his fingers weaving into the hair at her nape, his thumb stroking the frantic, rabbit-quick pulse at the base of her throat. The need to claim you, to mark you as mine so the very air would sing with it, it is a constant fire in my blood, a howl in my soul. Tell me to stop, he pleaded, his forehead leaning against hers, his breath mingling with hers. Tell me, and I will. I will spend the rest of my eternity in agony, but I will never, ever force you. Elara looked into the eyes of the wolf, the man, the king, the lonely soul who had waited centuries for her. She saw her future, her destiny, her home. There was no choice to make. There only was. Don't stop. The words were barely out of her mouth before his crashed down upon hers. It was not a kiss of gentle exploration. It was a conflagration. It was possession and promise, wildness and worship, a devastating claiming that shattered the last of her reservations. His kiss was a language of its own, speaking of centuries of longing, of a love that was primal and eternal. She met his fervor with her own, her fingers tangling in the thick silk of his hair, pulling him closer until not a sliver of space remained between them. He kissed her until she was breathless, until the world outside this cabin ceased to exist. He tore his mouth from hers, his breath a hot brand against her sensitized skin as he trailed a searing path down her jaw to the column of her throat. His teeth grazed the wildly beating pulse there, a silent, potent question, the promise of pain, of pleasure, of permanence. Yes, she gasped, arching her neck in a gesture of total submission and absolute trust, offering him everything she was. The world dissolved. There was a sharp, piercing sting, a bright, clean pain that was instantly consumed by a tidal wave of blinding, white-hot pleasure. It was not just a physical sensation, it was a seismic shift in her very being, a sense of profound completeness of a missing piece she had carried her whole life, finally slotting into place, washed over her with such force that tears seeped from the corners of her eyes. She felt his essence, wild, ancient, powerful, weave into the fabric of her soul an unbreakable, eternal tether. A low, triumphant growl vibrated against her throat, and in the deepest part of her mind a new presence settled, a warm, fierce, protective shadow. She felt his joy, his awe, his devastating love, as if they were her own. She was his, and he was irrevocably hers. Chapter 4. The Shadow of the Past. Elara woke to a world remade. The first sensation was the solid, warm wall of Kalen's chest against her back, his arm a heavy, possessive band around her waist, holding her anchored to him even in sleep. The second was the faint, throbbing pulse at the juncture of her neck and shoulder, the claiming mark. A blush heated her skin as the memories of the night flooded back, not as a dream, but as a seismic event that had reshaped her very soul. His scent, wood smoke, winter air, and him was woven into the sheets, her hair, her skin. A profound, unshakable peace settled deep within her bones. This was belonging. The roar of an engine, harsh and alien, shattered the morning's serenity. Kalen was awake and on his feet, in a fluid, silent motion, his body coiled into a predator's stance before her eyes could fully adjust. The peace in the cabin evaporated, replaced by a crackling tension. "Kalen! I know you're in there. Open this door." A woman's voice, sharp with urgency, cut through the wooden walls. He didn't move, his gaze fixed on the door, a low growl building in his chest. The door swung open before he could answer, and a woman with the same ash-gray hair and fierce blue eyes stood there, her chest heaving. Lyra. Her frantic gaze swept the room, landing on Alara in the rumpled bed, the stark, fresh mark on her throat unmistakable even in the dim light. The color drained from Lyra's face, her expression collapsing into pure, unadulterated horror. "Kalen, by the moon, what have you done?" Her voice was a broken whisper. "It is done, Lyra." Kalen's voice was a low, defensive rumble, but Alara, now attuned to the subtlest shifts in him, heard the undercurrent of fear. "She is my mate. The bond is sealed." Lyra's eyes snapped to Alara, blazing with a desperate intensity. "Did he tell you? Did he tell you what comes after the claiming? It's not just a pretty bond, human. It's a metamorphosis. Your body, your very DNA, will try to rewrite itself to match his. It can be volatile, excruciating, a trial many humans don't survive. The last time he—" "I know about Lyra," Alara interjected softly, pulling the sheet tighter around herself, not out of modesty, but for a shield against the sudden chill. "He told me everything." Lyra shook her head, a single, frustrated tear tracing a path down her cheek. "It's not just the past. It's the law, you foolish girl. The Alpha Council's decree is absolute. Claiming a human is forbidden because it is a death sentence 9 times out of 10. If they find out, they won't see a love story. They will see a crime. They will order him to—" Her voice hitched, the words too terrible to speak. Kalen's shoulders slumped, the powerful Alpha seeming to carry the weight of the world. "To carry out the sentence myself," he finished, his voice hollow, stripped of all its former warmth. "To kill my own fated mate to uphold the very law I am sworn to enforce as Alpha." The beautiful cabin, their sanctuary of skin and whispered promises, instantly felt like a tomb. The air grew thick and heavy with the grim reality. Their happiness, so new and fragile, was built on a foundation of ancient, brutal rules and a past tragedy that now threatened to become their future. "They're already coming, Kalen," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "I saw Ryder on the northern ridge at dawn. He was watching. He's the Council's most loyal hound. He knows Kalen's face transformed, the grief and fear hardening into a mask of grim, unyielding determination." He turned to Alara, and in his eyes she saw a ferocity that stole her breath, a love so desperate it would tear the world apart. He held out his hand. "Then we run." Chapter 5. The Trial of Love. Their flight was short-lived. They were intercepted not by a car, but by a silent, encircling ring of massive wolves that emerged from the trees like extensions of the shadows themselves. Kalen pushed Alara behind him, a snarl ripping from his throat, but he made no move to fight. To attack his own pack would only confirm his guilt. With a look of utter defeat, he allowed them to be escorted deep into the heart of the Blackwood to a sacred clearing where the oldest trees stood as silent witnesses. In the center stood the Alpha Council, 5 shifters in human form, their faces etched with the weight of centuries. The eldest, a man with eyes like weathered granite and a beard of silver, stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, was like stone grinding against stone. Caelan Thorne, Alpha of the Blackwood, you stand accused of breaking our most sacred law. You have claimed a human, knowingly risking her destruction and spitting on the traditions that have preserved our kind. What say you to this? Caelan stood unbowed, his spine straight. He didn't release Alara's hand. He held it tighter, their joined hands a declaration. I say the law was made in fear, he stated, his voice resonating through the clearing. It is blind. She is not just a human. She is my fated mate. The bond is true, strong, and pure. It does not destroy. It completes. The elder's expression remained impassive. The bond with the human Lyra felt true and strong to you once as well, did it not? Or have the centuries dulled the memory of her screams as the change tore her apart? The cruel words were meant to shatter him. Elara felt him flinch, but he held his ground. Before he could form a response, Elara stepped forward, pulling her hand from his to stand alone before the ancient council. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice, when it came, was clear and steady, ringing with a newfound strength. Because I am still here. The council's collective gaze, heavy and skeptical, fell upon her. She looked at Caelan, her eyes soft. The change, it's already begun, hasn't it? For hours, she had felt a strange, thrilling warmth coiling in her veins, a hyper-awareness of every scent on the wind, every rustle in the leaves. A wild, potent strength hummed just beneath her skin, not as an invasion, but as an awakening. It doesn't hurt. It feels like coming home. It feels right. A shocked murmur rippled through the assembled shifters. Such a gentle, seamless transition was the stuff of legends, not reality. The elder's stony gaze flickered, a crack in his impassive facade. He turned to Caelan. Is this truth? Caelan looked at Elara, truly saw her, the new light in her eyes, the steady pulse of her energy that resonated in perfect harmony with his own. A look of sheer, unadulterated wonder transformed his face. It is, he breathed, awe thickening his voice. The bond is not a sickness. It is a healing. It is not destroying her. It is making her whole. It is making us whole. The council convened in a hushed, urgent circle. The law was absolute, but the evidence stood before them. A human woman, claimed, yet radiant with health and a burgeoning power, her soul shining brightly in a bond they could all now sense was flawless. Finally, the elder turned back. Our law exists to prevent suffering and preserve our kind, he announced, his voice losing its harsh edge. We bear witness to no suffering here, only a bond as the moon herself intended, perfect and whole. He nodded to Caelan, a gesture of deep respect. Your mate is accepted, Alpha Thorne. The law is satisfied. As the council melted back into the forest, Caelan crossed the space in 2 strides and pulled Elara into his arms, crushing her to his chest. He held her as if he would never let go, his face buried in her hair, his entire body trembling with relief. Weeks later, under the luminous eye of the full moon, the transformation completed itself. It was not a struggle, but a joyous release. Where Elara stood, A sleek wolf with a coat of shimmering moonlight and intelligent, warm brown eyes now stood. She shook her magnificent silver-gray fur, feeling the power of the forest in her limbs, and let out a joyful, exuberant yip. Beside her, Kalen's immense frost-white wolf form nudged her neck lovingly, a low, contented rumble in his chest. Together, as one, they turned and ran, two halves of a single soul weaving through the moon-dappled trees, finally and forever whole. The song in her heart was no longer a whispered call, but a triumphant, eternal howl, joined in perfect wild harmony with his. They were free,